So, it's been a long wait for Jodie Whittaker's first series as the Doctor, and as a big Doctor Who fan, I kind of want to make this video just to explain my opinion and perspective on the series as a whole, since now it's pretty much finished and I've pretty much watched all the episodes now, and I want to discuss about each of the episode's strengths, weaknesses, and a few other certain things about the characters and other stuff like from behind the scenes, like set design and CGI sort of stuff, and all the like sort of things they used in the making of the series. So that's pretty much what this video is going to be about for today. Kicking off the series is The Woman Who Fell to Earth, and honestly, as an introduction episode to the new series and introducing Jodie Whittaker's Doctor and our companions for the series, I thought it was done particularly well. The fact that it takes a good amount of time for the Doctor to appear in the episode, whilst we actually see the other companions like doing their thing before the whole alien shit arrives to mess up their day, I thought that was actually pretty interesting, because this was sort of like what the first ever episode of the modern series did with Rose. In that episode, it actually showed us what the companion was doing before the Doctor appeared, and I kind of like this sort of like symmetry, like the shout out or reference to the first series and how it all started. Now, honestly, I was very skeptical, like everyone else pretty much was, considering when like Jodie was revealed as the next Doctor after Peter Capaldi. I was skeptical to see how her first performance would be alongside with the companions, and honestly, I thought they all mixed together very well. As her first performance and episode of the series, I thought Jodie's Doctor was actually very interesting and very quirky. Even though she was all over the place with the whole like getting used to her new body and getting over the whole regeneration effects, I thought she did incredibly well in her first episode with what she did and like all like this everything she said. I really started to like her character from the get-go, well, or pretty much from the end of this episode. The companions, Graham, Ryan, and Kaz, I all liked them three because they all seemed to work together very well as a team, and it was kind of funny how they all knew each other, but I felt like that made it a bit better for them as companions if there was going to be like three of them, because if they were all like strangers to each other, then it would be a little bit more difficult for them to like, you know, get used to each other. But since they all knew each other, I thought that sort of helped out in making them more of a connected family. Now, the enemy in this episode, Tim, I think his name is, as a first episode villain, I thought he was actually pretty decent. The fact that he was like a bounty hunter or sorts that like goes around killing other alien species for sports and then pretty much taking their teeth and putting them on his face, that was a little bit creepy, and I will admit that was pretty good practical effects. I thought as a first time villain he was actually pretty good, comparing him to other first time villains from the other series that we've seen. I will admit I wasn't expecting to see Grace out of all the characters to die. I honestly thought she was going to be that sort of character who would be staying behind on Earth, you know, just to make sure things are okay and to like call the Doctor if something goes wrong. But the fact that it killed off a character so very early on in the series, in fact the first episode, who could have been like a supporting character, you know, like how Jackie Tyler was for Rose and other characters we've seen throughout the series, I will admit it was a pretty bold move to do. Honestly, as the first episode in this series, I thought it was really good and possibly might be my favourite one of the series. I'm still debating on that, to be honest, but it's definitely one of my favourites, and it was a very good starting point for Jodie's Doctor in this series. Now moving on to the Ghost Monument, which is the much finding the TARDIS episode, since it vanished at the end of the Christmas special and we don't know where it went at the end of the first episode. So obviously Jodie tries to go look for it and ends up accidentally bringing the others along with her, and then they're in space, and of course that cliffhanger was a whole like bait and switch sort of thing, since they saw that out very quickly at the beginning of this episode. Now this episode felt very standard-ish for a Doctor Who episode. It was alright, but it was nothing too big apart from when we get to see the TARDIS for the first time. We had the Doctor and the companions on an alien world who get sort of caught up in this whole competition thing between these two other characters who are like trying to look for something, and then they have to like fight off a bunch of robots and the whole planet itself, and pretty much they have to try and survive like the elements and everything, but that's pretty much it. It was very standard to me, this episode. A decent like second episode for the series, since usually the second episode of every series is usually very standardish and sort of like helps like for us to get to know the new Doctor and the new companions and everything and all that sort of thing. But I will admit the whole bit with the TARDIS was really done quite well. And I will talk about the TARDIS after I've talked about all the other episodes. Oh, we also got introduced to the actual proper opening for the series in this episode too. No idea why they held it off from the first episode and had us see it in this episode, but honestly, I did like the opening. And it's sort of like a combination of new and old, and I really like that sort of whole look and feel of everything. Moving on to Rosa. Now, this was a very controversial episode for many people, like fans and non-fans and everything, pretty much because of what it was doing and what it stood for. I honestly liked this episode because of what it was. The fact that this was the moment in time where Rosa Parks, the first African-American woman, sat in a white person's seat, and she didn't get up because her and every other non-white person deserves to sit in any seat they want because of equality and all that. And I like how the episode executed this whole movement, and it felt very strong, to be honest, in my opinion. I also liked in general how this episode showed the like racism between like certain races. Like in other Doctor Who episodes set in similar time periods like this, they don't show it too well or show it off enough. I think this episode did a pretty ballsy move when he had Ryan pick up a handkerchief and gave it to a woman, and then he gets slapped because he was a black person. I thought that was a very ballsy move for like Doctor Who to do, but it was something that would more or less happen in this time period, and I thought like the way they showed off this whole racism thing was done well. I also thought the banter between the Doctor and the companions was actually pretty funny in this episode, especially that motel scene where the Doctor and Graham are like trying to make sure that Yaz and Ryan don't get seen by this or discovered by this cop who enters the room and is like pretty much trespassing and all that sort of stuff. And I really liked the way they sort of handled that situation. The main problem this episode has is the villain, really, who is, his name is, what, Razko, I can't remember his name or how to pronounce it, but I felt like he was just there to just mess around with time. He just felt unnecessary. Like, you really could have had this episode without him, and it pretty much would have played out the same way. Well, I mean, he does try to mess around with the whole events and stuff like that, but near enough, it still plays out the same way. And the way that they, like, sort of take care of him, like, in the finale of the episode, was very rushed and just didn't seem entirely right for his character, since he could have done a whole lot more, since he had a time manipulator, so he could have done a lot of damage if he was, like, around later on in the series. But, yeah, the way they dispatched him was just a bit messy and rushed. But overall, I thought this was a very well done episode. Maybe one of my favorites. It's very difficult between this one and the first episode, which is my favorite, but I thought this was definitely up there. Moving on to the Arachnids in the UK. This is probably the funniest episode of the series, but the one with the most dull name. Arachnids in the UK has the Doctor and her companions arrive back on Earth in Sheffield, where we get to meet Yaz's mother, as she is apparently fired from this hotel job because of like weird stuff going on. And I think this is pretty much kind of like a Yaz episode, since we have her and her mother together, so this is a bit more of a Yaz episode. But the whole like banter and commentary between the companions and all the other characters, I thought was really funny. I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely some of the funniest stuff was said in this episode, and then I don't think any of the episodes really replicated that hilariousness that I got from this episode. I thought this episode was really funny. Although I will admit the way people being killed by the spiders, that sort of funniness sort of settles down a bit and gets a little bit more creepy when you realise just how dangerous these things are. I said that this is one of those many episodes that has been taken under fire from the whole political agenda sort of side that this series has apparently been like fired against and stuff like that from fans and other people. And the fact that like the whole like rubbish has been disposed like underneath the hotel, and there's been enough waste to mutate the giant spiders, and it's pretty much a message to the way humanity itself in the real life is like sort of dumping rubbish all over the like planet and stuff like that and not cleaning it up, and this is sort of like being a sort of message to that. To me, that's a good message, because then it shows people that, yes, we need to clean up our waste, otherwise we're pretty much going to either kill all of our life on this planet, or we're going to mutate it into something that will definitely kill us and pretty much cause us to become extinct. So, either way, clean up your fucking trash. But I will admit, Chris Chibnall said there weren't going to be any returning monsters. And we've pretty much had giant spiders before, so I don't know what the hell you're saying about no returning monsters, Chibnall. Yeah, sure, they're a little bit more different with biology and what they're like, but giant spiders are still giant spiders. Now, next we come to the Saranga conundrum. Now, I will admit, and a lot of other people will probably agree with me, this was possibly the least likable episode. This is probably the most boring episode in my opinion, and probably a lot of other people's opinions too, as we see the Doctor and her companions like sort of trigger this mine, and then they get rescued by this sort of hospital medical ship, and they, as they're recovering from their injuries, this whole like other issue with this little giant, this, well, not giant, but this little small creature is like slowly destroying the ship from the inside as it's eating everything, the Pating thing, and then the Doctor and her companions and everyone else on the ship has to like sort of like take care of this creature before it like destroys the whole ship itself. Now, I wasn't really getting a whole lot from this episode, to be quite honest. I mean, the supporting characters weren't really all that likable, to be honest, and, I mean, they killed off that Doctor dude, like, straight away, which was kind of funny. I don't really know what the whole point of having, a male character pregnant for. That was a little confusing. Yeah, he was an alien, but I don't really know if that sort of thing was necessary or not. It was a bit of a surprise, but it felt sort of forced in there. And like all the other characters just felt sort of unnecessary. I don't know why. This episode sort of felt unnecessary as a whole, to be quite honest. It's not that I didn't like it, I was just not very interested. Like, it wasn't really doing much for me. I will admit, throughout the episode, the Doctor was being hampered by her injuries and stuff like that. I don't know why she was the only one affected by it. I guess because she was the one who probably took the Brood to the blast, and is obviously the one who's hurt the most. But the fact is, that didn't really do much to stop her. All she did was just look as if she was limping a bit, but that was it. I mean, nothing really much else came out of that. And oh boy, the Pating. Oh Christ. I mean, sure, you wouldn't want to be eaten by the damn thing, but it didn't look that great as a Doctor Who monster. I mean, there's been plenty of monsters in Doctor Who's history that didn't look too great, but this is definitely one of those in the modern series that's like, you look at it and you'll just laugh at it. It doesn't look terrifying whatsoever. Honestly, it looks like if Stitch from Lilo and Stitch just decided to be a bit more of a rabid monster, and that's pretty much what he became. Like, if you took off all his fur, this is the outcome. So yeah, this episode didn't do a whole lot for me in the end. Now, next up is the Demons of Punjab. Now, sorry if I didn't pronounce that correctly, but this is definitely the Yaz episode. And at this point, Yaz hasn't really defined herself as a companion or where she is in this whole group, and this pretty much was just like a retelling of Father's Day in the first series, but much more a safe version, as Yaz wants to go back in time to see like her grandma's hidden past, like what she's keeping secret from her, and pretty much what she discovers. Yeah, it does quite well at showing the whole Indian Revolution of Independence against Britain in 1947. I thought that was actually pretty interesting, like what was going on, the fact that the Doctor and her friends could be in danger if things escalate, and the fact that the main villains themselves weren't really villains at all. They were just like aliens who were just there for people who like are dying and are alone and have no one to like see them die or account for their death. So that kind of plot twist was interesting. It's mainly the fact that the main villain was actually the brother of like Yaz's grandma's actual like first husband. That, well, I kind of sort of guessed he was going to do something, but I wasn't expecting like it to be that dark at the end where Yaz's grandma's husband ends up getting shot and killed. That was a bit sad, but to be honest, this episode is a bit of a skippable one for me. It feels like a very safe version of Father's Day, whereas Yaz doesn't like end up like fucking up time, and then these Reapers come out of nowhere. I just felt like the whole episode was just a very safe version of this, and was trying to like sort of make Yaz's character like known a bit more. But other than that, this episode wasn't bad, but it wasn't great or good either. Now, moving on to Kablam. This I thought was an interesting episode, mainly because of the whole mystery element behind it. As the Doctor gets a package from the Kablam company, which obviously is a Fez, which is a nice shout out to Matt Smith's Doctor, and apparently she finds a letter that says, "Help me," so they obviously go to the Kablam factory and try to figure out what the hell's going on, and then we figure out that it's like the whole system is going against like everyone and killing people and the robots and stuff, and turning people into mush, which was I honestly thought this whole episode would be like, or the way it would turn out would be like, oh, we have this robot uprising and now we have to stop it and everything. But no, it turns out that the robot uprising were actually the good guys, and it was entirely just one of the workers, like, being a terrorist and all that shit. And I was like, oh, okay. And there's a guy that you were supposed to like feel sorry for because he had like this crush on someone, and the fact that she ends up getting killed, and you're like, oh, shit. And then you realize he was the one who was doing all this shit in the first place, and you're like, oh, shit. And I was like, huh. The way this episode played out was actually kind of interesting with the whole mystery elements and all that. Next would be the Witchfinders, where the Doctor and her friends land in post-Tudor Lancashire, which is actually very close to where I live, so I kind of like the location setting for this one. And they end up finding out that like innocent women are being either drowned or burned to the stake because apparently the people think that they are witches, and apparently the dead are coming back to life because of the soil and everything. And so King James I has come along with his own tools of witch finding and killing, so the Doctor and her friends pretty much have to help him out solve this situation. Now, there was a bit of controversy with this episode, mainly because of the fact that some of the things the Doctor said, because now he is a she, and the fact that she would have been, this whole situation would have been a whole lot easier for her if she was still a dude. She isn't wrong. I mean, the way women were being treated in this time period was not great. In fact, it was pretty damn terrible. And the things that she says are pretty much entirely correct, and I pretty much fully supported her in that area, because, I mean, hell, if women are being drowned just because they did something slightly different that doesn't look right, then what the fuck is wrong with you? I did sort of like how silly the episode was. Even though it was a historic episode and it was like people were being drowned and shit, there was a bit of silliness, especially with Alan Cumming as James I. And he's probably been the best supporting character this whole series, mainly with the way he acted as the character, which was really funny. And I'm pretty damn sure there was a bit of like sort of gayness going on with Ryan, because he had a sort of special interest with him, and it made me think like, does James I have like some secret fetish or something? And it just kept me very curious about his character during that whole time. But it was funny as fuck. I thought the monsters were a little bit terrifying too. I mean, seeing some undead women holding an axe coming at you in a very tight, confined hallway in a house would be absolutely terrifying, and I would get the fuck out of there. I mean, these are probably the most creepiest looking enemies we had this season, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but if I saw these like in a hallway, like just coming at me with an axe, I would definitely run for the fucking hills. But honestly, overall, this episode gave me a sort of classic feeling. Like, this episode would definitely fit in the classical era of Doctor Who, with the whole way it just pans out in the end. I just sort of like that episode in a retro sort of way. Next is It Takes You Away. Now, this was a very interestingly confusing episode, well, definitely at the end, as the Doctor and her companions land in Norway and discover a blind girl in a boarded up house saying that there is a monster out there and that her father is missing. And then the Doctor and her companions discover that a mirror goes to like another dimension, and then a whole bunch of confusing stuff happens. Honestly, this felt like the most Doctor Who episode of the series, with the way it introduces some more science fiction stuff with interdimensional, like, kind of stuff that happens. And I really like that throughout most of the episode, especially since the big twist that it introduces is that Grace apparently returns, and I'm like, okay, I was not expecting you to appear. And apparently it's like some sort of universe that's sentient, like it can think of its own will and everything and all that kind of thing. It kind of confused me with a few bits here and there. I might have sort of overlooked the episode a little bit, but yeah, that's kind of what I was getting from it. I did like the fact that they actually had like a proper blind character. Like you could definitely tell this wasn't just some person pretending to be blind. It was an actual person in real life who is blind, and I really like they used this to their advantage. Although it was kind of weird how they had Ryan and like the blind girl sort of team up together or have some sort of relationship here. Maybe it's because they've like lost family members, so I think that gives them some sort of like connection really. I did like how the episode resolved itself with like Graham and the blind girl's father like sort of having to fight against the universe because it's brought back these people that they've loved who have died, and they think they have a second chance with them again, but really it's just a manifestation from the universe itself. And the whole thing with the fact that people are angry that the universe turned itself into a talking frog. I mean, really, that's where Doctor Who fans sort of put the line. We've had a talking television in the past. I mean, seriously? I mean, we've had freaking blobs of green slime here and there from time to time, and we've had the fucking Exorbiloff, and yet people draw the line at a fucking talking frog. It was just trying to communicate with the Doctor. That wasn't really what it was, like, actually looks like. It was just trying to look like something that has some sort of relevance to the Doctor or something, like, to just make sure they can actually speak to each other without anything weird going on. But yeah, I just don't get why people were getting so hissy fit about this whole like decision. But honestly, this was a fairly confusing episode, but in a sort of a good way. I was like, yes, this is kind of what Doctor Who is meant to do to you sometimes. It's meant to confuse you with new scientific facts and shit like that it tries to introduce. And yeah, I've been confused before, but this isn't a bad confusing. And then we have the finale, which is the Battle of Ranskor Av Kolos. I probably just murdered that name, but it is probably the stupidest name for a finale episode I've ever seen for a Doctor Who series. But yeah, the Doctor and her companions travel a planet where 9 ships have sent out distress signals, and then they head to that planet and end up meeting an old friend, Tim Shaw, who apparently has survived from his encounter with the Doctor and has apparently been stuck in his planet for 3,000 years and now plans to try and destroy Earth with a couple of aliens he's using at his disposal, and now the Doctor and her friends have to like stop him, and that's pretty much the whole point of the story. Now, this did have a finale type feeling with the fact that the whole situation did feel a little bit more intense compared to other episodes in the series. The fact that we have a returning enemy, which is Tim Shaw, who's using the powers of these aliens to destroy Earth because it has a significance connection to the Doctor and her companions, and the fact that now the Doctor and her companions have to stop him no matter the cost at this point. When Graham said he was going to think about killing Tim Shaw, I was like, oh shit, could this be like some really major character development? The fact that the Doctor said, like, if he kills Tim Shaw, he would not travel with her anymore. I was like, oh shit. And the fact that he actually spared Tim Shaw's life, and then him and Ryan just decided to like freeze him in one of the cryo tubes or whatever the hell they were. I thought that was like, okay, so maybe he could return in the future since they decided to just lock him away and have nobody go to the planet. So at some point he might return because there's no doubt someone will stumble upon him. But until then, I thought this did have a decent finale type feeling with the whole stakes and everything that was going on. So, that is pretty much my quick exposition of all the episodes. Probably wasn't in great detail, but it's pretty much the best I could think up of. But yeah, honestly, overall, I thought Season 11 was okay as a Doctor Who series. I think it was better than some that I've seen in the past, for sure. It's not the worst series I've seen, especially, and I bet a lot of people are probably saying it's the worst they've seen because of yada yada and all that kind of bullshit. But to me, I thought this was an actual decent first series for Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. I do kind of want to see what else she can offer to the role. Now, I do want to talk about the characters and how they were portrayed. Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, I thought, was actually very lovable, to be quite honest. She's a very likeable character with the way she expressed and portrayed the Doctor. She was, like I said, all over the place. She had a very adventurous spirit, and the fact is, even though it was quite difficult to sort of get a hold of her of what her Doctor was like, because you could if you could like compare it to all the other Doctors, you could definitely like sort of separate them. But I think the way that personifies Jodie's Doctor is the fact that she's adventurous, and like Peter Capaldi's Doctor said during his final words, was be kind. And I feel like Jodie's Doctor was kind, and the fact that she's no longer sort of suffering from like the events of the Time War and all that sort of thing. I feel like that is finally being left behind at last, and instead we get more information about the Doctor's family. Throughout this series, she kept talking about them a lot, like her sisters, her grandmas, her aunties, her mother. There was a lot of family talk from the Doctor in this series, and I felt like that's going to add a bit more mystery to her character. Like now we might be exploring her family and background, because as we've seen in the past during the very beginnings of Doctor Who, the Doctor did have a granddaughter who was called Susan, and maybe they might be building up to something like this in the future. If they are, that could be very interesting. I would love to see where that goes with Jodie's Doctor. And just the fact that the Doctor is now a woman doesn't make any difference. It still feels like the Doctor. I feel like Jodie Whittaker has done a very good job at making the Doctor still being the Doctor, even though that character is no longer dude after like 55 years. But who gives a shit? I mean, I feel like the Doctor hasn't got a specific gender. The Time Lords themselves have said gender is something insignificant to them. It doesn't matter if they're male or female. They can be whatever the hell they want, and I'm honestly fine with that. When they announced that the next Doctor was going to be female, I was kind of interested to see what they would do with this, because since there are some situations where it'd be a bit more difficult for a woman to get past because of like specific time periods, as we saw in the Witchfinders, that was the kind of stuff I was expecting to see in this series at some point, and it happened, and I was like, yes, that is exactly what would happen. I liked how they did that sort of stuff. But yeah, overall, I thought Jodie Whittaker's first season's The Doctor was actually done quite well. Speaking of the companions, Graham, Ryan, and Yaz, I thought they were all kind of interesting. They all worked and mixed together very well. It would be quite difficult to sort of separate them as their own characters, especially Yaz. I feel like they could have definitely done more work with her, as I felt like she was kind of just there. But I feel like Ryan and Graham definitely had the sort of strongest development, since they were both family and lost someone close to them, which was Grace. And yeah, I feel like the development between their two characters was done slowly but well over the series, as they was sort of like seeing all these new stuff in space and time, and it grew the relationship more between them as Ryan grew to know, like, make Graham his actual grandfather, or like being able to call him his grandfather or granddad. But I think Graham, out of all the like companions in this series, was just fantastic. Bradley Walsh was a great casting choice for this character, and it's been a while since we've had an older companion. I know we had Wilfred at the end of Tennant's time, but he wasn't really a proper companion. He was kind of there as a supporting character in a supporting role, and the fact that we have an older companion for like properly throughout the series, I thought was done really well. He's very relatable in a way where he just says a lot of things that make a lot of sense. Whatever Graham said was like, yes, you're completely right, whenever situations just didn't seem right. And he was just really just a lot of just funny lines. Were some of the best lines were with Graham in this series, and I really loved his character. I also want to talk about the TARDIS. The TARDIS was, it didn't grow on me initially. There were some TARDISes that grew me like straight away. Like Matt Smith's first TARDIS, that was fucking class. I love that TARDIS. This was a little bit difficult to like sort of get a hand on, because Jodie's TARDIS hat is sort of like Tennant's TARDIS. Or, well, Chris's and Tennant's TARDIS, since they both had the same one. It sort of reminds me of that, but it's just more crystallized and much more dark. But I like the whole, like, sort of outward sort of esque, like, you know, the panels or whatever the light things are. It had a very sort of Eighth Doctor feel, like that TARDIS. That had, like, a very dark, gothic atmosphere. And I sort of like how, instead of the doors just being there in the TARDIS at the entrance, now we sort of have, like, an outline of the shell before you go inside, like the exterior of the TARDIS shell. I really like that for the entrance. That was really pretty cool. Like, you can sort of see, like, it's only the back of the TARDIS exterior that's, like, leads into the TARDIS interior. Kind of confusing, I know, with the way I explained that, but I just really liked how they made the entrance to the TARDIS a bit more, like, sort of bigger. But, yeah, the TARDIS has slowly grown on me, but I wish there were, like, a few more scenes with the TARDIS. I felt like they just had them for, like, a few minutes, and that was it. And sometimes they never really were in the TARDIS whatsoever in some episodes. But, yeah, I mean, over time, they'll probably give us more TARDIS scenes, and maybe I'll grow to like it a lot more. Now, I also did like how the series went about. It felt very episodic, very like the classic era of Doctor Who, where it's like you'd have episode after episode, and it wouldn't really be a kind of connection whatsoever from like beginning to the end. It would just be like a new adventure every single time. Whereas each series we've had in the modern era, it's been like each series is sort of built up to something. Whereas this one didn't really have that sort of thing. I liked that. It had a more classical feeling, even though the first episode and the last episode obviously had a connection, along with the ninth one too. Like, it takes you away with the whole connection with Grace's death and that sort of thing. But yeah, I just liked how for once, if like you watch the first episode and the second one, but then you watch any of the other episodes, you could probably get away with it and understand what's going on, because none of these episodes are like fully connected, and I like that. It has a retro classical feel of old Doctor Who, where it's just episodic episodes instead of it building up to something big and gigantic like some big cliffhanger like shitfest. And yeah, I actually kind of like this sort of like old take but fresh take at the same time. I thought the locations, the set designs, like the practical effects, I thought they were all pretty decent. The CGI, even though they said that they'll have like special effects done by people who did like Blade Runner 2049, are we sure about that? Because there were some effects that just didn't look too good at all. I mean, I think the Pating is probably the worst like CGI effect I saw throughout the whole series. And yeah, I just didn't like that thing whatsoever. But the CGI overall, it was mixed. It's like sometimes it was good, especially with like the weapons effects with like lasers and blasters and all those. Those were pretty good. I liked those effects. But yeah, the CGI was a little bit mixed. I also like the cinematography too. Definitely a huge change from previous series. I will admit it's kind of sad to see that there's only like 10 episodes this season, as the seasons are getting shorter and shorter. Like, it started with 13, then it went to 12, and now it's 10. It kind of sucks that we're getting less episodes now, but maybe they'll increase it over time, hopefully, but I don't know. Maybe because there was no sort of big, huge story arc throughout the season, it sort of made sense to only have 10 episodes, and obviously the episodes do run longer now. They're like 15 minutes or so now, instead of like 45, 40 minutes as they were in the past. But yeah, I kind of wish we had a few more episodes this season. But yeah, honestly, overall, in conclusion with season 11, I thought as a whole, this was an okay series. It had one or two episodes that weren't bad, but were just a little bit boring or uninteresting to me. But the majority of the episodes were pretty entertaining, and I mostly liked them. This isn't the best series, but it isn't the worst series I've seen. As obvious, I might make a video ranking each of the modern series at some point in the future, as I do kind of want to make more episodes on Doctor Who, since this is something that I've been a fan of for a very long time, and yeah, an episode like this was pretty fun to make, or at least do. This might be the first episode in a long line of Doctor Who episodes that I might make in the future, if you're interested in seeing those. But yeah, overall I thought Series 11 was done okay. So, that is my episode about Season 11 of Doctor Who. Hope you guys have enjoyed this. Leave a like, subscribe, comment on what you think of like Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor and as this series as a whole, on what you might be looking forward to in the future. Share this video on social media, and I shall see you guys in the next random video.